The moment you've all been waiting for, research questions and hypotheses. We've been building up to this since the beginning of the class, which doesn't feel like much because it's only a week, but still, we've been building up to it for the entire class. So this is what we're going to be discussing in this video. So research questions are the fundamental question which serves as the major overarching goal of the study. Why are you doing this? Where did your idea begin? What do you want to study and why do you want to study it? Research questions are critical features of study because they set the parameters of the study. So for example, you could have a study that said, what is the association between parental divorce and physical health outcomes of children? So the very basics of this would need to be, I measure parental divorce, I measure physical health, and I make sure that I either measure the age or I only get children. And I should probably measure age anyway. So you would need at least those three. So it sets your population, who are you going to study, and what are you going to measure in that population. So are males more likely to develop heart disease than females? Again, it sets up, we need to measure heart disease and we need to measure gender. And then there may be some age characteristics or population characteristics that we are certainly more excited about or want to study. So research questions typically focus on gaps in the literature or areas of concern or whatever. For example, we know hypermasculinity leads to depression in adult men. What we don't know is whether hypermasculinity leads to depression in adolescent boys. So our research question is adherence to hypermasculine social norms related to depression in adolescent boys? Question mark, not period. Sorry about that. So we started with what we know. We know hypermasculinity and depression in adult men. What we don't know is a similar question, which is hypermasculinity and depression in adolescent boys. So then that's our research question, is figuring out what has already been done, and then how can I build off of that in some way. In this way, it was doing a different age group. So the attributes of a research question are that we must specify the relations between two or more measurable variables. Broadly, there are two types of relations we can investigate. One small side note here is that if you want to sound really academic and really smart, relations are between variables. Relationships are only between people. So you can't talk about relationships between variables. Not everybody does that, but it's one of those things that if you talk about it that way, you'll really sound smart. SMRT, I guess. So you can have comparison or association or correlation. Let's talk about each of those. So a comparison question, how does one group compare with another group on some type of measure? So you have an independent variable, which is categorical, and it separates your group, and then dependent variable must be continuous. Is there a difference between husbands and wives' marital satisfaction? So your independent variable groups men and women, so it's gender, and your dependent variable is marital satisfaction, and it must be some continuous measure, so at least an ordinal scale. At least an ordinal scale. You could also have an association question. Is there a correlation between one variable and another variable, or does one variable predict another variable? So these must both be continuous, but especially your dependent variable. Is there a correlation between the parental monitoring and adolescent substance use behaviors? So we have an independent variable. Oh, I guess this is just a correlation. So correlations don't really have independent and dependent, and regression, which is one variable predict another variable, does have an independent and dependent. But is there a correlation between the parental monitoring and adolescent substance use behaviors? And we'll talk more about different statistical methods for testing all of these, but for right now, we're talking about comparison and association. Don't worry about correlations, regressions, all of that yet. You're not ready, but you will be soon. A research question has to be a measurable question, meaning it is stated in terms of specific measurable variables in a population that you can reach with your method of measurement, which we'll talk about after this. So we're going to do an activity here, and we will do that later. So I'm just going to skip through all of that right now. We'll do that during class. Research question takeaways. A research question is the fundamental core of a research project, study, or review of the literature. It focuses the study, determines the methodology, and guides all stages of inquiry. And it has to be a measurable question. That's the important part. So now we're moving on to hypotheses. Once we have a research question, our primary goal is then to arrive at a testable hypothesis. A hypothesis is a predictive statement about what you expect to find. In other words, it is the anticipated answer to your research question. Let me say that again. A hypothesis is the anticipated answer to your research question. It is an educated guess based on other theory that you have built it off of. So here are some examples. Research question. Is a child's experience of physical abuse associated with his or her levels of self-esteem? Hypothesis. Children who have experienced physical abuse will show diminished levels of self-esteem. Research question. Is age correlated with increased feelings of loneliness? Think about what the hypothesis could be, and we'll answer it here. Age is not associated with increased feelings of loneliness based on the research you've done and what you want to find out. Your hypothesis will be very specific to your research study. So as you think about your empirical paper, think about what is my research question and what is the anticipated answer to that question based on the way that I think the world works, based on my theories for how the world works or the literature that I've read. What do I think the anticipated answer to my research question would be? So then how do we get from a research question to a hypothesis? It is a prediction. We have to get from the question to the anticipated answer. Prediction should be justified by prior research and/or theory, though some hypotheses are exploratory just because not enough literature exists to justify a hypothesis. It's an educated guess, and like a theory, it is never proven, only supported. So this is another pet peeve that I have. People say science proves this. Science never proves anything. Science supports hypotheses, but a hypothesis could always be disproven. For example, we've disproven a lot of scientific hypotheses that even became theories and laws, such as the way the solar system works, that the Earth was the center of the universe. That was a scientific hypothesis, and it has since been disproven. Flat Earth as well. Flat Earth is a hypothesis that the Earth is flat, which has since been disproven. So science never proves any hypotheses, but we support hypotheses, and then when there is enough evidence for the hypothesis, then we can talk about it and be pretty confident in it. But we could always have something come around tomorrow that was measured in a different way or a better way that disproves our hypothesis. That's always a possibility. So there are different types of hypotheses. You could have the null hypotheses, which is there is no relationship. Again, sometimes it comes out as relationship, but it's relations or difference between variables. And it has to be some statement of equality used in statistics. So you would say male and females are not different on relationship satisfaction, or mothers do not talk to boys and girls differently about sexual behavior, or violent video games has the same effect on boys and girls. So it's a statement of equality. There is no association or difference between the variables. Here are some more examples that I'll let you look at here. So you could have a directional research hypothesis, which is reflect differences or relationships, nature of difference or relations specified. So for example, greater conflict in marriage will be associated with lower levels of marital quality, and women will have higher IQs than men, which is a comparison question. So we have greater conflict in marriage will be associated with lower levels. The null hypothesis here would be greater conflict in marriage will not be associated, but if we're talking about our research hypothesis, make it actually have an association. And then you could also have a comparison. Women will have higher IQs than men. Or you could have non-directional research hypotheses, which is, in this way, you knew women will have higher than men, or greater conflict in marriage will be associated with lower levels. That higher and lower is what makes it directional. Here, it's just related or differ. So there's no higher or lower terminology or vocabulary used here. In non-directional research hypotheses, they just reflect differences and relations, and we don't know which way it is. And this brings us back to the first day. We have a hypothesis, we have a theory, which leads us to a research question, and then that research question leads us to have a hypothesis. Leads us to have a hypothesis, and then we run our experiment and generalize it back to a theory, so we can ask another research question, build another hypothesis, get evidence that supports our hypothesis, try to generalize it using inductive reasoning to become a theory, create new research questions, hypotheses over and over again, building a career until we understand more about families than we do today, which is what all of us want, to understand the most about families so that we can provide valuable suggestions and help improve the lives of others. And our research questions and our hypotheses help us do that. I look forward to our class time together. See ya.